Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to you to the first meeting of 2022 of the Partnership and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee. We'll start with the apologies. Are there any apologies? The only apology we've received, Chair, is from Councillor Robin Williams, the Resources Portfolio Holder. Thank you. So before we go on, I'm just going to read out the statements that we read out at the start of every meeting. So I'd like to remind everybody present at the meeting that it will be held remotely and live streamed on YouTube and will be capable of repeated viewing. You're asked to turn off your mobile phones and also to put yourselves on mute unless you're contributing, as the meeting is being recorded. You're also asked to raise your virtual hand if you wish to contribute or ask a question, and then to take it down after your contribution. So first of all, I'm going to go through a list of members. So if you could just say if you're present or not. Councillor David Roberts. I acknowledge that I'm present. Councillor Trevor Lloyd Hughes. Yes, I'm present. Councillor Vaughan Hughes. Yes, I'm present. Councillor Alan Roberts. Good afternoon. Present. Councillor Margaret Roberts. Good afternoon. Present. Councillor Nicola Roberts. She sent her apologies.
Ken Hughes.
Councillor Ken Hughes. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Robert Llewellyn Jones. Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Glyn Haynes.
Present.
Good afternoon, Glyn. Are there any other members present? Any co-opted members? No, there aren't, Chair. I've seen 3 other elected members on the screen. Councillor Llun Smedi. Good afternoon. Councillor David Hughes Thomas. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure if I saw Alan Mummery. Yes, he's also here. Any other elected members? Yes, I'm here, Chair. A warm welcome to Councillor Miriam Jones as well. So thank you, everybody. Declaration of interest. We always ask at the beginning of every meeting if there are any declarations of interest. So to receive any declaration of interest by any member or officer in respect of any item of business. Okay, so we've gone through the preliminary matters. So can I welcome the officers who are present this afternoon? And we'll start with Mrs. Anwen Morgan, the Chief Executive. Good afternoon, everybody. And at the start of the meeting, I'd like to say that our temporary monitoring officer, Mr. Hughes, is unable to be present. He's been called to court. So through Vicky, I'm trying to get in touch with Mr. Robin Jones to see if he can be in attendance at short notice. Thank you. Mr. Dylan Williams. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chair. I'm Dylan Williams and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive. Good afternoon, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Williams. And this is the first opportunity for me to congratulate you on your appointment to the post of the Authority's Chief Executive. We congratulate you and wish you well. Thank you. Mr. Vaughan Roberts. Good afternoon. Vaughan Roberts, Director of Social Services. I thought I'd seen him somewhere. It's Anwen Hughes. Good afternoon, Anwen Hughes, Service Monitor working across children's and adult services, but I'm here this afternoon because I have a lead role in terms of corporate safeguarding. Welcome, Mrs. Gwyneth Morn-Hughes. Hello, how are you? Apologies, but my camera isn't working. I'm the Senior Welfare Officer in the Learning Service and also an appointed Safeguarding Lead for Education and also the Chair of the Corporate Safeguarding Board. Mrs. Anwen Davis. Good afternoon, Anwen Davis, Scrutiny Manager. And Mrs. Meirwen Hughes. Good afternoon. Are there any other officers present? Good afternoon, Chair. Please, Howard Hughes, Director of Education Skills and Young People. Also, I'd like to refer to Darren Owens. Darren Owens is the Implementation and Projects Officer for the Anglesey and Gwynedd Community Safety Partnership. Good afternoon, everybody. There we are. So we'll go on with the agenda and we'll turn to the minutes. So we want to present the minutes to be confirmed, the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of November this year. We've all had an opportunity to have a look at them. Is anybody ready to propose that they're correct? Anybody willing to propose the minutes? Yes, I am happy to propose. Thank you. Proposed by Councillor Alan Roberts. A seconder, please. Yes, thank you, Councillor Ken Hughes, for seconding. And I'm sure we're all in agreement. Thank you. Right then. So we'll turn to the first item. We have two items this afternoon, which is corporate safeguarding arrangements and the annual report of the Community Safety Partnership for Gwynedd and Anglesey. And we'll start with corporate safeguarding arrangements. So, of course, what we have here is an overview of the work of the Corporate Safeguarding Board for the period from June 2020 to September 2021. And this is a summary of the priorities for the future as well. I think it's important to note that this is a matter for all heads of service within the authority. Safeguarding is everybody's responsibility in every service within the Isle of Anglesey County Council. So I'm going to ask Councillor Llynos Medi just to present or introduce the item. Thank you. Yes, thank you for the introduction and for highlighting the importance of this issue for everybody, because we're all responsible for safeguarding. And we've tried to ensure that this isn't just something for the social services. And from the report, you can see how every department does look at their responsibilities. And as a member of the Safeguarding Board, which is shared by Gwyneth, we can see how all the organisation looks at the issue, and we can learn from other services. And looking at the report, the important thing is that you as elected members are assured that there are arrangements in place and that the authority does consider safeguarding. And looking at training, you can see how extensive safeguarding is. It includes things like prevent and domestic abuse. So with those few words, and it's important to note that the internal structures do take safeguarding seriously, and I'm very pleased of that. And the heads know that it's a question that's always important to me. So any person who's linked to the authority understands what the safeguarding arrangements are. So with those few words, I think Vaughan, as the Director of Social Services, would like to come in. Thank you. I'm going to invite Mr. Vaughan Roberts, the Director of Social Services, to come in. Thank you. that has summarized 5 minutes in my presentation. So I'm pleased that that message does come across consistently and that everybody hears that message, not just you as members, but officers in the services as well. As you know, this responsibility does fall on the shoulders of the Statutory Director of Social Services, and we have arrangements in place in Anglesey where we have a strategic board, which is the action plan is in place, and that will be starting on a new journey after our meeting this afternoon. You've got a lot of detailed information in that document. The information is quite technical, but in the covering report, we've tried to give you a high-level overview, and then we've provided additional information. So I think it would be worthwhile for us to look at how we can summarise that better for you as members. And I hope that that will start a discussion around that. I don't intend to read through the report. I'm sure you've had the opportunity to go through it in detail. Anwen and Gwyneth are here as well. Gwyneth chairs the operational board. Elements of that board focus on specific elements. And just to talk to you about the fact that this is more extensive than just us as a council, in the report you can see that it talks about at least 3 boards that are run at a regional level, focusing on safeguarding children, adults, the contest board, which is attended by Dylan Williams, and there's also a regional vulnerabilities and exploitation group in North Wales. So there are a number of other ways which we can measure our response to safeguarding, and not just internally. We don't just focus on issues in Anglesey, we do look out quite often and look at the full picture on a regional and national level. So with those few words, I think it might be more appropriate to invite questions, and we can bring Anwen and Gwyneth in to answer those questions. Yes, I was going to ask Anwen if she wanted to speak. Anwen Hughes.
Hello, Richard.
Can Anwen hear me? Yes, thank you. I think the introduction has been given, and I'd rather answer the members' questions. Okay, so the first hand I can see is Councillor Margaret Murray-Roberts. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Vaughan for admitting that the reports contain too much information sometimes, and that we might drown in information. Perhaps we read things more than once sometimes. Of course, it comes down to the pandemic, and the priorities have changed as a result. And I can think of things that have come up during the pandemic. I think they were important previously, but they're more important now, such as domestic abuse and the Welsh language. And so the priorities will change. So between you, we work on a local and regional level and nationally as well. Do you always sing from the same hymn book? What I want to know is everybody in agreement, either locally or otherwise. We accept the same information, or we receive the same information. So I'll take domestic abuse as an example. We receive regular information from the police, and we share learning. If figures in one area increase significantly compared to other areas, we look at the reasons for that. I think one thing that does vary is the response. And we have the one front door here with the domestic abuse project. We discuss low-level domestic abuse cases right up to the most serious cases where we attend MAPA meetings. So our response as a council is a little different in terms of how we deal with cases. You know, for example, the low-level cases that wouldn't usually come to our attention. But there are arrangements under the Vulnerability and Exploitation Board. I think there's no end to it. We're never going to be able to see we've reached a certain point, and we're not going to give a lot of time or put a lot of resources into it. We have to review all the time. So this is why this is an annual plan, because people's needs change. We have a picture of what our priorities will be in terms of children and adult services, but more importantly at a corporate level moving forward, to respond to the needs of Anglesey residents. But we will be looking at the priorities when we put the new corporate plan in place. Thank you for those questions. Councillor Alan Roberts. Thank you. I've also enjoyed receiving the document. There's a lot of information here. You said at the beginning, and the leader also said, that everybody is responsible for safeguarding, and I totally agree with that. But when I go through the document, I do ask myself the question, does everybody or has every department bought into its safeguarding responsibility? For example, if I look at training up to November, there is a difference in how much training some departments have completed in terms of some of the areas. Even with schools, there's a figure for one training course that appears to be low. For example, cyber awareness 52% for schools. Well, I felt that that figure should be higher, considering the sorts of world we live in. Who's going to answer that? If I could answer the first question. We have to be careful sometimes how we interpret data. And we've done a lot of work on data in the children's services recently. And when you look at the percentages, and the number of staff that bring the percentages down in the children's services is, for example, we have one member of staff who only works for 2 hours a week. Come back to the office and to join training sessions to have a better understanding of what the main issues are for the individual services, so that this becomes a way of not only telling services what they need to do, but that the structure we have in place helps the individual services to be able to assure themselves that they meet the requirements in terms of workforce, policies, and the way they contract services. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Since Councillor Alan Roberts has mentioned schools, I'd like to assure you that it is a priority for us, and we work closely with Vaughan and the team. Gwyneth's role is crucial within the service, and as Anwen Hughes has said, structures are a little different, and schools do have their own structures in terms of safeguarding and adopting policies and so on. As you know, as governors, and of course Estyn, one of the most important questions Estyn asks about is whether safeguarding arrangements are in place. So although the data is lower in terms of school, they do have other structures to respond to this. But as Anwen said, we need to move forward to look at the corporate aspect, but just to assure you that safeguarding is in place in the learning service and in schools. Yes, Alan, you can come in. So that's the danger with statistics, of course. You know, bare statistics, you can interpret them in many different ways. And the three of you have given us the background, you've given us the explanation, and you've told us what the true situation is. And as someone who has an education background, what Rhys said makes perfect sense to me, knowing what happens in schools in terms of staff, be they teachers, assistants, or cleaners and so on. You know, things naturally are in place in schools. So thank you for that explanation. Thank you, David Roberts. Yes, like everybody else, I'd like to thank for the report. It's a lengthy report, and the responses we've received now does improve our confidence that the work is taking place and that the issue is addressed. One thing I noticed in the report is that it talks about the Adults and Children's and Family Services on Anglesey, saying that it was inspected during June 2021. There were 7 positive aspects, but there were 3 areas to be improved. And the one I'm most concerned about that is the national recruitment problems in adults, which is really felt on Anglesey. Does this cause a risk? And what steps can we take to help the situation? Before Vaughan answers that question, this is an area that we've been discussing for a number of years. I'm sure Anwen remembers, you know, occupational therapy and so on. You know, we've been preaching about this for years, that there is a lack of staff and we're unable to appoint people. Does it come down to the salary? Is the salary not good enough? Is that why we can't attract young people, for example, to this area, which is an extremely important area? Money isn't everything. I think you need an unique, a special person to work in this area. Working in the care sector. And we must remember what jobs we're talking about. It might not give you the explanation that you need. During this period, which has been challenging, the jobs we're talking about is occupational therapies and social workers working with adults. I was interviewed by Audit Wales last week, and they were very happy with the structures and processes we have in place to try to attract workers. But it is important for people, especially those on the lower salaries, and those on the really low salaries. And what's important is that the working conditions for these people are good. But we compete with supermarkets, the tourism industry. We compete with businesses that can offer better packages. And it's not everybody who wants to provide personal care for people. So the jobs in our residential homes are quite stable. It's working out in the community that's difficult. People visit people's homes every day and provide care packages for individuals. We find that challenging. The government is also looking at this. The government's response isn't really, it's more long term. It doesn't give us quick fixes. They're talking about supporting people to learn to drive, for example, and to pass their test. They'll pay for their lessons and their test so that we have more people who are able to drive from community to community, especially in rural areas like Anglesey. They're looking at training. Internally, we're looking at how to modernise the home care service. And that's something simple from the uniform we give people to providing electric cars. So there are a number of elements. In terms of young people, during the pandemic, we've been working with Coleg Menai, and we now do offer placements to students following the health and care course. So we offer them placements in our older people's homes. When we had the initial discussions with the college, they said that some of the young people on the courses don't have a relationship with older people. They might not have a gran and granddad. You know, lots of them won't have visited an elderly people's home. So, you know, they tend to be fearful of what else we'll see in these homes. So we will have young people coming into our residential homes, and in the hope that they'll become members of staff, members of our staff bank. So I think we're doing as much as we can at the moment, but certainly an improvement in the salary and the working conditions would help. It's not just us as a council who's looking at this, but it's helpful that the government is looking at this as well. Thank you for that. The only reason I mentioned that was I remember over 20 years ago, the late Councillor Pat Larson would raise this issue time after time, and I'm sure Anwen Hughes will remember that. You know, she talked about this all the time. When are we going to get occupational therapists and speech therapists? She said that these jobs should have a higher profile, and we should be going out to speak to our young people in careers, conferences and so on. Councillor Ken Hughes. Thank you, Chair. We've heard from Llinnos and Vaughan that Anglesey prioritised the safeguarding area, and one of the council's corporate safeguarding priorities is to ensure that people, vulnerable people, are safeguarded and that they can live their lives safely, and to promote children and adults' welfare. I think our duty as members of this committee is to come to a decision about how well the council achieves its statutory duties in terms of keeping people safe. Alan has already referred to training. I'd like to talk about risk assessment. As you can see in the data, this is lagging behind. Because risk assessment is so fundamentally important to the work of both departments, children and adults, I'm very concerned about this. And the question that comes to mind is, doesn't this affect on your ability to safeguard vulnerable people? Who's going to come in? First of all, I think members should understand what risk assessment is, because there's no point for us to do something if it doesn't have an effort. I'd like officers to explain to members what risk assessment is and what's its purpose, and then to explain why it's like that. Thank you, Anwen. Does Anwen Hughes want to come in? I'm sorry, I was just on mute. I take it that Councillor Ken Hughes is referring to an action in the plan about risk assessment and the fact that we're behind in terms of completing that work. The two tasks in that column refer to trying to establish within the services that everybody audits themselves. We can't depend on internal audit to come in and to tell us how good the controls and processes are within services. We need to develop that culture where we do that internally by ourselves. responsibility, every head of services responsibility is to assure him or herself that arrangements within their service are strong. The two actions there is something that we're trying to establish so that everybody does something across the council at the same time. So we have a picture of how things are working across the organisation. So we have completed a piece of work about how good services arrangements are in terms of identifying what training is needed and have they attended the required training and when do they need refresher training. So there's an action about whether every head of service can say that they have a system where they know that their officers have had the training. The next one is the risk assessment. That is, if we appoint somebody and all the checks haven't been received, but that we need to get the officer in place quickly, does every service undertake a risk assessment in that situation? Or if there's an allegation against somebody during their employment, or if there's a change in somebody's DBS status, is a risk assessment undertaken at that time? So it doesn't mean that it isn't happening. What's a little behind is that action where every service uses a simple tool to audit what they're doing to address that. So that action will carry over to the next plan, and the next operational board will be looking at planning that action. So I'd like to assure the committee that the assessment does take place. What we haven't completed is a check of how good and how effective those arrangements are. Thank you. I was looking at the report and I could see that there's a lot of information contained in it. We can see that Gwyneth Morn Hughes chairs the Corporate Safeguarding Board, but there are 3 other boards. So how does the process work? The difference is that the other boards look at specific areas. What this board looks at is what are the safeguarding processes within the Isle of Anglesey County Council as an organisation. I don't remember who mentioned this or who said no man is an island. But then information is received because people attend the different meetings. So you have a synergy in terms of information and influence. So the vulnerability group looks at domestic violence, and the Isle of Anglesey County Council has a duty to ensure that ask and act training is provided. And perhaps you'd like to ask Gwyneth about how the council and schools especially have undertaken ask and act. So you have a regional board that looks at specific areas, and then locally we use the board and the officers associated with the board to ensure we meet the requirements in terms of ask and act in this case. But ask and act is an example of how the boards work, and schools have really taken up this issue. Does Gwyneth want to add anything? Thank you. And thank you, Anwen, for the kind words. Schools have responded really well to very challenging training, And I don't think that this would have been possible unless safeguarding in schools is at a very mature level where they can see that preventative work is an important part of ensuring that we keep our children and families safe. And what you have with Ask and Act is the understanding of domestic violence, and that head teachers or people responsible for safeguarding or those who manage others are aware of the signs and can ask the question plainly. Are you being kept safe? Is somebody abusing you at home? And questions like that for educators can be a very difficult skill to learn because they haven't learned that in college. But the fact that they have the understanding that safeguarding is so important, they've been able to change the lens of keeping children safe, and they've been able to extend it to keeping their own staff members and parents safe. One good thing, if you want to put it into a corporate perspective or context, is that we have the one front door, which looks at domestic abuse cases on a very low level. They nearly identify them before they become major incidences. Through the social services, schools receive any referrals from the police. We read them, then pass them on to the specific schools, and we can identify quickly any potential for domestic abuse or violence. So you have a good process there. Schools have a firm understanding of what domestic violence is and how important it is to keep our children safe, to identify the signs and to work with agencies. Because we won't be asking schools to be responsible for the actions, we'll be asking them to identify the signs and to make referrals. So that is a good example of something that has taken place in schools over the last year. And it does close that loop in terms of trying to keep, you know, things that are horrific. It is a priority in Wales. It's a priority across the region. And it's certainly a priority for us on Anglesey. And that's one way we can respond to that concern in just one small aspect of safeguarding, which can have such a big effect. You've had training on ACEs, and we also have trauma-informed schools, which helps us to understand how important safeguarding is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Excellent. Councillor Trevor Lloyd-Hughes. Thank you, Chair. Really thankful for the report. And as Mr. Ken Hughes said, it's a huge issue, but having said that, you've put everything in there. The question I have, I agree with Councillor Gwilym Jones, the Chair. How many roles are vacant at the moment, and how many are required to bring it back to the what it should be? How many vacancies are there? If I recall, I agree with the Chair. This is a difficult subject, and recruiting people is difficult. Does anybody know how many vacancies there are? Just to make sure, I say that there are vacancies across the council, but is it possible that this is too low and that we need to stress upon this on this issue? Thank you. Would Vaughan like to come in? In social services, there are vacancies, like you said, in the most challenging areas like home care. If there are vacancies in somewhere like Flying Start, the reason for that is because Flying Start is funded, is grants funded, so we can't keep people. That's dependent on grants. People come and then they leave and they want permanent roles rather than grants funded roles. We have been successful in children's service specifically in attracting new staff. You'll be aware of the traineeship program that we have in place at the moment for social work, and physiotherapists as well. We too have started on that course. So they will be employed once they are qualified. So with regard to social services, apart from the challenges that we have in home care, perhaps, we have been quite successful in filling roles. And not just getting people in, but also keeping people employed with us. The turnaround, especially in children's services a few years ago, was high, but now we're something like 8% against a corporate target of 10%. So we are in a better position and we are attracting staff and, more importantly, keeping them. They're staying with us. So if there are vacancies, I am quite confident that we are able to fill those or give people opportunities in other roles to apply for these roles and give them an opportunity to take up different roles or be on a different journey and to develop them and to support them internally. We have some staff who move from one department to the next so that they get that experience and as part of their professional journey. So I'm fairly confident that we can fill those roles, except for the home care roles. So they're the ones that are very challenging at the moment.
Mrs. Morgan.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgan.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Yes, thank you. The questions you're asking regarding vacancies, it's a good question to ask, but just to inform you, HR have completed a paper for me now noting what the situation with regards to vacancies in each service, but a little bit more information, people, roles that will be filled, the roles that are going to be advertised and so forth. And I will be seeing further work on that with the paper that will be presented to me. I am listening to what you're saying, and it is a concern to us all, but not just here in Anglesey, but every council, every organisation, every government, as far as I can see. But what we want to deal with is Anglesey. So that paper is being prepared at the moment, and that will be shared with you so that you can have got that hard data. So that will be with you very soon. Thank you. The leader? Yes, thank you. I think the most important thing for you as a committee is to ask, are there vacancies that are a cause for concern with regards to safeguarding, like the question David Roberts asked earlier? What is the training process before people come and work for us? Matters like that, because people think that safeguarding is we do have other areas. If we don't keep our eye on the ball, then there is a risk, and leisure is one of those areas. So this is it's a wider issue, more wider than social services, and we need to get that understanding to trickle down. And I think it was David who asked the question. It's been recognised by CW. It's been recognised as a risk. Well, what are you doing? We have steps in place to fill those gaps, but also I think Vaughan will be able to report on what is the training regime for people before they start with us. And then Anne, when explained about the way we assess the risk as well, some people have to start before everything is in place. So those sorts of, from this document, you need that certainty that those processes for safeguarding communities are in place. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. David? Yes. There's a report at the end. I think it's the Safeguarding Board for North Wales. a report for the adults group, and towards the end of the report, in part 1, it talks about statistics and referrals have increased. And then towards the end, there is towards the end of the report grates on me a little bit. I'm not sure whether we need to respond to the increase rather than manage the increase, and then improving the percentage. It doesn't matter really about the percentages. It's not about percentages. It's about improving. It's about improving the service provided. I think it grates with me a little bit, just the wording of that report. Would anybody like to respond to that? We can look into that. We can look at the way the report has been presented to the safeguarding board, but maybe we should think about the way that we word things in future. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. Are there any more comments or questions? I'm sorry, Chair. Can I just come back on that point raised about the report? What has been referred to there is the arrangements. And there is a regional meeting in the next fortnight that will look at the progress and the differences in referrals from agencies regarding adults in danger, adults at risk, and the figures are different across the counties of North Wales. So we need to look at that consistency. What we can do and what's in our control there is we can look at once that referral has reached us, once this the information has been screened to start off with, we need to make sure that the person at risk has agreed to that referral and so forth. There are things that we can do, I believe, as a service to make sure that that's inquiry under 126 of the Social Services Act and Wellbeing, that they can happen in different ways. And at the moment, they tend to be completed by team managers. And so it is possible that once we have finished the series of training, that work could be done by a social worker, an experienced social worker. So there are things that we can do to respond to that increase by using the resources we have in a different way. Thank you. Thank you very much. I take it that that's a historic hand up, Mrs. Morgan. Yes, thank you. There we are. Well, this is the benefit of having only 2 items on the agenda. It gives you an opportunity to us as a committee to get under the skin of a specific subject. And certainly, we've had excellent presentations this afternoon by the officers, and the members have scrutinised in detail, fair play, or scrutinised the report in detail. Well, now that we know, certainly I think it's been important that this board has been established, and important as well that it is representative from each department. Now, the important word I feel is safeguarding. As I said at the beginning, safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, each and every one of us in each service within the council. So I am going to come to the recommendation in the report. The committee is requested to scrutinise the report, and you've done so, and note the arrangements that are in place, as well as the areas that the Strategic Corporate Safeguarding Board are driving to ensure that we meet statutory duties in this field, and then that we offer comments in order to guide and influence the priorities in the action plan. Is anyone happy to propose the report, please, or propose the recommendations? I'm happy to propose, Chair. Thank you. Do we have a seconder? I'm happy to second. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that we are all in agreement. And thank you to the officers, each and every one of you, and to Llynas as well. Okay, so we're moving on to the second item. The annual reports of the County Partnership of Gwynedd and Ynys Môn, and we are welcoming Mr. Dylan Williams and Darren Owens, and also the portfolio holder with responsibility for this specific area, Councillor Alan Mummery. And I'm going to ask Alan whether he will present the report. Well, I wasn't expecting that, Gwilym. I thought I was just going to sit back. But I think this summarises the work that we've done during the period in question. There has been changes and we are moving forward. And one of the things that I would like to refer to here is that one of the benefits that we've had is the presence in the meetings. In working through this medium, you'll be used to meet in Carnarvon and then in Anglesey, meet jointly, and quite often the people who did attend, maybe that the number's quite low, but since doing it remotely, there has been full memberships, and I think that has been of advantage to be able to get put better arrangements in place and make better decisions. With those few words, I'm happy. I wasn't expecting you to ask me to do this work, but there we are. There's nothing like putting somebody on the spot, is there? Now that I just want to explain at the beginning here, after that introduction from Alan, there is statutory requirements within the Act for the partnership to report formally to us. Now then, once a year, when the report is considered, the committee changes to be a panel, a justice panel. So we're not a scrutiny panel. We are now a justice panel. And what is crucial today is that we are holding the partnership to account and not the individual partners. We're not going to scrutinise the work of the police or the fire service, but the work of the partnership. Now then, I'm going to ask Mr. Dylan Williams to present the report, please, and say a few words. Good afternoon, everybody. I think you've touched upon the point that this is a partnership that has been established for 22 years, and that it is a statutory requirement that every local authority works with the police in these areas, and Anglesey has continued to do so. I would just like to support the words of Councillor Alan Mummery with regards to the efficiency of the partnership. She's now been able to be held in 90 minutes. There's no need to travel. So the ability that officers has to take part has increased. Part 3 on page 2 of the report outlines the areas of the strategy responsibilities that are important. So justice and crime, preventing dealing with all the priorities. So those areas are listed there. They affect every community, town and rural area on the island, and are relevant to everyone on the island. It's very difficult to measure the value and to prove what is, but we do have to recognise that we need to share data, listen to the challenges in different communities, how we respond to them, good practice. That's as important as measuring the outcomes. And if I can just highlight some examples of where the partnership has added value before handing over to Darren. And linked to the previous item, the partnership has recognised domestic violence as a priority, and the partners have agreed to meet weekly, virtually in a MARAC or Multi-Agency Risk Assessments Conference. And this then enables us to share information with every partner and work more effectively. The partnership has had an input in the need to have a prevent agenda in place, linked with anti-terrorism and so forth. And then moving back to legislation, these are areas that the Council cannot act alone. We have to have that input from others. So the partner has had an input and has had an impact on the alcohol agenda in North Wales, and ensuring that this area has a voice and an input. And so it's not just about recognising, prioritising, but acting on issues. And another one that has had more airtime, and I'm sure that it will become more prominent moving forward, is cybercrime. We ourselves as a council, obviously, and a lot of elderly people on the island perhaps don't understand, and especially with the world moving more virtually and people more dependent on computers, this can affect people's mental health. And then there are training being held locally by the police as a result of this being recognised by the partnership as an area that is increasing, and as a result of the pandemic it is even more important than previously. So with those few examples, I will present Darren. Darren supports the partnership and has done remarkable work over the past few months. So I'd like to thank Darren for preparing the reports and supporting the partnerships to make sure that there is no slippage. So I don't know whether, Darren, you want to add anything before handing over to the chair? Can I just welcome you first, Darren? It's nice to be able to welcome you to the Scrutiny Committee for Partnership and Regeneration. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Dylan as well. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Darren. I'm the project officer, and I've been working with the partnership since summer. I'm deputising for Catherine here today. I hope that you've had the opportunity to read the report, and I will go through the main points. So I'll ask the partnership to report formally. So we're required to do that every year to make sure that we meet the requirements of the legislation, and the purpose is to update you on the work. So it's a statutory partnership between Gwynedd and Mourne. Before I joined the team, the partnership faced a number of changes, including losing grants and losing local coordinators. However, the partners have still been as committed and prepared to work together. By today, we meet virtually every quarter and share information and keep in touch constantly. We respond to the strategic assessments by the police, and there are 7 priority areas this year. There will be an update available shortly by the police, and then we will update the plan. We receive data on a quarterly basis by the police. Any substantial changes are open to further analysis, and any problematic areas will be reviewed. The reports notes the levels of crime in Gwynedd and Mourne in the area. It explains about the effect the lockdowns had. So violent crimes raised during the increased during the lockdowns. Following after the lockdowns, the levels went back to the levels they were before the lockdowns. There was an increase in the last quarter because of the closing of the economy at night. For the most of 2020-21, there was an effect on those levels. Those levels are now the levels pre-COVID, since the hospitality sector was reopened. Residential burglary levels decreased during 2021, and this is certainly because more people were working at home or were on furlough because of the pandemic, with houses rarely being left empty. These reductions have continued this year because many are continuing to work from home. Looking at the kind of crimes that have increased this year, the number of domestic crimes have increased in Ynys and across North Wales. Domestic violence is still a local priority, and the MARAC meetings, like Dylan referred to, continue to be held weekly. Also, there was some increase in antisocial behaviour on the island in the last quarter. This reflects the increase seen nationally linked with young people at the end of the lockdown periods. There was similar increase in the task force across North Wales that's been held monthly to deal with antisocial behaviour. Turning to our priorities and the plan, despite of COVID, most of those activities were completed in 2020-21. There was some effect on the actions in the plan, and 5 of the 28 items weren't completed as a result of COVID. Looking ahead, this work includes preparing national protect plans and working on the alcohol strategy for the area. So those are the main points of the report. I'm now happy to answer any questions. I may not be able to answer all of them, but I will try my best. Thank you. Thank you very much to you. I am going to start. I can see my friend from Llandegwan with his hand up, so I'll start with Councillor Alan Roberts. Yes, thank you. One thing Darren referred to, the cuts and the financial cuts, substantial ones, I assume. Has that effect on the efficiency of the work that you're trying to do as a board? And then I'll come back to my other question. Hi, I'll come in. Unfortunately, don't know any difference because I wasn't in the role when those grants were available. It's difficult for me to be able to answer that question. Certainly, it has affected the way that we can commission projects locally, but the money has moved regionally by now, so I'm not sure whether it has had a substantial impact on our way of working. Okay, thank you for that. You've referred to the question I was going to ask originally. Dylan has referred to it, and you have as well, Darren. There are 7 priorities that have been listed here. How often do you review what the priorities are? Especially, I feel, with COVID, naturally, and the situation in people's homes. I'm sure there's more violence in the home happening, violence against wives and women because of the situation that the pandemic has created. So how do you decide on those priorities? Do you review the 7 priorities? Are some of them maybe prioritized above others because of the situation we're in? I'll come in to answer that one. So our priorities are guided by the strategic reviews by the police. So they're prepared to do with. So the priorities are as a result of what the police has seen, but they are also guided by other documents, such as the Safer North Wales regional board, the PCC plan, and also the beaten crime plan by the government. So those are the things that give us the priorities, and that it's just 7 priorities so that they're not listed in any order. Thank you for that.
You're mute.
You're on mute. I'll explain why. I'm not far from RAF Valley, and aeroplanes are flying overhead this afternoon. I apologise for that, Councillor Margaret Roberts. Thank you, Chair. And I have to say that Alan Roberts has stolen my question. I've said before, he has a tendency to do that. But I can adapt my question because you've touched upon it, and Dylan has touched upon it, and Darren has as well. So that's to do with priorities and how they've changed over the pandemic. But as Gwilym said, we're not here to pick on any specific partner within the partnership, but it is fair to ask maybe on behalf of the stakeholders, do you agree with the priorities, the new priorities? Are you all singing from the same sheet? Are you all in agreement? Or are there things that some people would like to see us being done, or having different priorities? Mr. Dylan Williams? That's a good question. Hand on my heart, and Councillor Alan Mumry will say there is an agreement across the partnership because the data and the strategic reviews push forward the priorities. I think everybody's there to provide a service. We're not there to that it is really a true partnership. So there's no sense of a competition for having different priorities or for other services to lead on different priorities. The priorities don't change within the year, only as a result of the strategic review. The focus can change, especially if the data shows that and shows that there is a need for discussion or interfering in a different way. And I agree with what Dylan has just said. In a way, what we are doing what we do is we tweak the figures. We've talked previously about the data. Well, we've also been tweaking the data regularly because one specific area where we've seen this is the complaints regarding fraud. And this is an area where half of the figures don't reflect how much it is in reality, because some of them are nationally rather than coming back to us locally. And can I refer to one thing as well, something that we may not have touched upon with regards to funding? We need to recognise how much strain was on the previous officer working with it, working on her own, more or less, and maybe the work not being given due attention. And one of the things that takes time and money are things where you have to provide reports, where terrible things have happened, such as murders in homes. And so part of this work is now done by specialists rather than it's being something, they can go on for years. And it's an important piece of work, and it takes time and resources. And one other thing, I hope, as the figures come through regarding these crimes, I do share them with all the councillors in Anglesey, and I hope that people that they are given due attention. What astounds me is that nobody comes back to me and asks questions. Do they just look at them and then say, "Oh well, it's quite bad, isn't it?" Should we be more reactive? So I would encourage you to come back with comments, so that we can maybe ask further questions and get look further at the data. Thank you, and I'm sure members do appreciate receiving that information from you. Thank you for that. Councillor David Roberts?
I'm
not sure. More of a comment rather than a question. The question I had noted down are two questions, really. I think Dylan and Alan really answered them. The questions were, how committed is the partnership? And are there examples of where where the partnership, has had an effect? So Dylan has given us examples of that. But the question that why isn't this in the reports? We've looked at the reports, and that wasn't mentioned. We don't really know how committed the partners are, and what difference do they make. We've all got experiences of being part of a partnership, and sometimes there's no ownership in a partnership. Because it's a responsibility of everybody, it's a responsibility for nobody. So what we want to see is, outcomes. And in this report, every figure in the table is red, unfortunately. So the number of crimes are going up, apart from the fact that everybody's home and looking after their properties. But I don't know. I feel that more work needs to be done. We are fortunate that we live in an area where there's little crime, but nobody wants to see crimes increasing. Yes, that's true enough. Can I ask? Dylan Williams has referred to some areas of concern. Domestic violence and so forth, and cybercrime. What about a very concerning area, the county lines? Are things getting worse? Are they improving in these areas? The county lines? I'm not sure. Because I was quite skeptical of the figures saying or showing an improvement and showing that there weren't any county lines in Anglesey at the moment. So that was from the last meeting, if I recall. So that's what was said in the last meeting, but I'm not sure whether they stop when they get to Menai Bridge. I'm not sure. Dylan, sorry. Yeah, just to add, those comments are correct. There's a lot of work ongoing. And there are lots of success stories by North Wales Police. So the situation could be much worse than it is. And that comment by Councillor Alan Mummery is correct. When we met last time, it was reported that there weren't any county lines operating on the island at the moment, which is very encouraging. Before asking Daron if she has anything to add, if you're happy with that, Chair, can I just add that the data is all right at the moment because we're comparing with the past 2 years where there were, and there have been lockdowns. And as a result, when you want to look at the data going back to 2019, really, where we have a full year where everybody was going about their business, whether that was legal or illegal, without restrictions. So because of those restrictions and those lockdowns that have happened over the past 2 years, it will take time for things to get to normal. And then we can compare year on year and compare the figures, compare whether they are, see whether they are going up or coming down. And in the recent discussion we had with the police commissioner, we need to analyse maybe the differences between Anglesey in the summer and in the winter, when the population is sky high, and then is that reflected in the resources that's available and how visual the police are. So maybe that's something that we need to look at further, because this is very important for the partnership. Thank you. Alan? Well, I can say now that Dylan has stolen my question. So that's exactly what I was going to ask. I was thinking of exactly the same thing. It's not, the population doesn't just double or triple in the summer. The figures are unbelievable. I would say that there is a clear difference in the kind of crimes that happen in some communities. There are very quiet communities for some parts of the year, but in some of these villages, the population goes through the roof in the summer, and quite naturally the problems change. I'm also glad that Alan has drawn attention to the work by the officer before Darren. I do remember the officer coming in front of us 3-4 years ago and talking about the workload following a murder that got attention nationally. That office had to deal with all sorts of things and prepare reports as part of her role during that period. It was totally unreasonable. And like Dylan, I would like to see what the difference is between the summer and the winter. And that's a really good question, I think. And it's something that we will all would all like to see an answer to that question. Are there any more questions or comments? I'm trying to look around the room in case I miss anyone. I'd just say I'm just going back to the number of people who attend the meetings now, because I do remember the last one before the pandemic in the chamber in Gwynedd, and maybe were there 4 or 5 of us? That was all. So the work has improved because we are holding meetings remotely. So maybe we were maybe a little bit shy in adding that into the report, and not wanting to admit how that not people used to turn up to the meetings. I'm not sure how we can compare the figures. How many are committed by people who live on the island, or people who are in Gwynedd, or people who are done by incomers, or people who just come here and then leave very quickly. We need looking at those figures is going to be a huge piece of work. It would be very interesting, and maybe to be glad that maybe not many islanders are responsible for these crimes, but it is something, the summer and winter comparison is something that we need to look at and compare. It will be easier, obviously, once we have the year-on-year figures, as Dylan referred to earlier. When we're able to compare the figures rather than these peaks and troughs that we have at the moment. Well, I can only thank the 3 of you for your presentations and being so ready to answer our questions. Now then, the recommendations is to note that the report, so note the contents of the report and the attached document. So do we have a proposer? Don't all rush in at once. Happy to propose, Chair.
Happy to say Elia, Mr.
Who's going to second? Happy to second. I'm sure we're all in agreement. And once again, I can only thank you all. Thank the 3 of you. Thank you.
Well, now
then we go to the final item then of the afternoon, which is the Forward Work Programme. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Anwen Davis to present this item, please. Thank you and good afternoon again. There is one addition I would like to refer the committee to this afternoon. Following a discussion in the Chairs Committee yesterday, the next meeting of the committee will be cancelled, and the only item that's been programmed for the February meeting will move to the March meeting. And you'll see here that there are 5 items that have been arranged for the March meeting. There are a couple of them to be confirmed, and we'll work with the chair to confirm the agenda for the 8th of March. So with those few comments, Chair, I'll hand over back to you, and happy to take any questions. Thank you. Yes, the February committee was a little bit light, so we have decided that it would be wise to cancel that one, and then the next committee will therefore be on the 8th of March. So I think we've gone through that quite well this afternoon, and I can only thank you as members again for your attendance this afternoon, and to officers for the presentations.